We're joined now by Laure from sensoryhealthservices.com to chat about the work she does helping churches to become more accessible for those who are living with sensory needs through conditions like ADHD, autism and others which might have sensory attachments to them. Thank you so much for joining us on Reflections. Before we get started in hearing about how you're helping churches, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, great to be here, Chris. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm an occupational therapist, 30 years now doing what I do and continuing to love it and thinking of ways, how can I help people more? How can I help them better? How in this world there's a lot of people with a lot of needs and there's not a lot of us who are skilled or trained in the particular area of sensory processing that is my speciality. So a lot of what I do is how can I now get out to equip and empower other people to help themselves, to help somebody else, to help their family, to help their church. So I'm a sensory health coach, occupational therapist and sensory specialist, doing what I can for homes, schools, churches, workplaces, anyone who likes to connect and just get a bit more support.
So how exactly did you get into working in this area of supporting those with sensory needs?
That's a very interesting one. It was in when I was at university, actually. I got a sponsorship to go and work in Belgium at a rehabilitation centre, as it was called, for people with autism and hearing impairment. So that is an interesting combination. But I saw the huge difference it made having somebody work in the classes with the students who were there. If I can tell you one story, I was a young therapist, and there's old PE benches that you have, and there was a boy at the end of the PE bench, and I, was sitting on it and just kind of like shuffled my way towards him, but I obviously did it too quick and too fast because he flew off the side of the bench and, kind of was kicking and screaming on the floor. And I thought, what have I just done? The OT that was over the session said, well, he's sensory defensive. And I had no idea what that was. I had no idea. So she explained about the tactile system, our touch processing, and if you touch certain individuals unexpectedly, it sends them into flight or fright, and then they, they'll have a meltdown, that they'll lose it, for want of a better word. So, but then I saw this same chappie in the same day, really happily going on a bouncy castle that they had in the school, I have to say. And he was absolutely fine with people touching and bumping into him. And I thought, what is going on here? So she explained some of the neural pathways, that the way that God's designed us to be, that actually we can cope with certain sensory input if other things are happening in our bodies at the same time. So this totally fascinated me. So that started me on the journey of wanting to investigate and specialise in sensory processing, which now there seems to be even more of an awareness of and a demand and an increase in society of people recognising that actually the sights and the smells, and especially in churches for people to be able to sit still, that's hard. And so families are not coming, children are not coming, older people are not coming. There's a lot involved in sensory processing, and it affects an awful lot of different aspects of our life.
Absolutely, it does. I mean, I was reading on your website that around 61% of Christians who have a sensory need might actually avoid going to church, which is a real shame because church should be a place that is open to everyone. Tell us a bit about the survey and why Christians might avoid attending a Sunday service or a gathering of some kind.
Yeah, I was really convicted. We had, I was called CHOTS at the time, which was Christian Occupational Therapy Support. And in the prayer meeting that we were having, I just had a real sense that I needed to do something about church. I've been an OT for years, doing all my bits and pieces, but never addressed anything specifically in church. But of course, lots of people came because we would pray, and we needed God's mindset to be able to help us manage and navigate the world that we're in, to stay living in hope and health and freedom, which is one of the promises that I trust what the service offers. But it was in there, I thought, right, okay, I need to do something, but I need to find facts. I know that I hear all of the stuff and all of the struggles, but actually out there in the world, I want it to be objective. So I sent it through Facebook, sent it out, and it was just like, what are the struggles you are having? I gave some examples of, what about the noise in church? What about the lights in church? What about people touching you unexpectedly? Or how long are you expected to sit? Or how long do you feel comfortable? What about the standing and the sitting? And so everything came back from the noise of the church organ to the noise of the band. So it really did not depend on anybody's tradition. It was auditory processing is an issue. There are people who don't feel they can come because they are constrained because their individuals make noises, whether that be a child or an adult with a learning disability. So it's like, well, our churches are not set up to enable people to be able to do that because it distracts and it disturbs other people. So how do we look at all of this and help people who want to move but they're expected to sit still, or people who want to make noises but we need to be quiet to hear what's going on, or people who love all their jumping around or the much more high intensity type of worship experience, and for others that's totally overwhelming and it's just too much and they'd rather not go. So it's trying to help the churches identify areas where they can change, but also support individuals to find out what their own unique sensory thumbprint is. That's how I've termed how God has made each of us so individual in the way that we interpret and process sensory input, and then find the best fit. It may not be that the local church is the best church, because there's going to be too many things that are going to change about that. But we're all one body. We're all one, we're all in Christ. We shouldn't be too denominationally sensitive. I think there are cores to the gospel and we need to hold on to those. And I wouldn't choose to go to certain churches that might be preaching something different to what I believe Scripture is saying. But we're still one body. And it's how can we support those who process things differently? What are we prepared to change in our churches and what aren't we? When is it time to say, actually, a different environment, a different type of church is better for me, but that's okay. So we don't get possessive over our people. We don't get fearful if they want to move. It's just how can we get the church and us as the church discussing and talking about this so that we can help each other and for us to grow closer to God, grow in faith and be more of a witness and be more of his hands and feet, which is his heart, and give him glory through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was listening there very carefully to what you were saying, and a lot of it really rings a lot of truth. I mean, one of the things I think isn't discussed is obviously the other side of some of the conditions that people now have and are spoken about, things like autism. And you mentioned it there about being noisy in church. And I think in your role in helping churches, as well as helping the churches, are you supporting perhaps the individuals and parents as well? Because I think from the other side of it, you're kind of saying, well, actually as a parent, I don't want my children to be running and screaming and running around because the church we're at isn't quite equipped. Are you trying from that angle as well to support people?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Sensory Health Church program, Healthy Church program, that one is totally free. And I love people just to be able to go get that, sensoryhealthychurch.com, totally get the resources. There's questionnaires that you can just ask yourself and your own family. Or if you're in church leadership, that you can have a look at and you can bring to the whole congregation. You work it through. It's just like, how can we be more accommodating to anybody who is neurodiverse or people who have short-term as well as long-term differences in the way that they perceive the world. But yeah, I absolutely work. So I have Christian sensory support. I have a sensory super system which helps families intimately to know how they each process sensory information so that it helps them in school, it helps the parents at home, it helps the child going to sleep, it helps with eating, it helps with the handwriting. Or for the parents who are in the workplace, it's actually the parent who's more neurodivergent than the child, and they're struggling to hold down their work. So how can we help you to thrive in your workplace better? So there is an individual sensory super system to help people understand their own sensory thumbprints and how to manage and how to treat those and how to flourish with who they are. And then there is the Sensory Healthy Church program for churches generally to be able to look at whether you're in the congregation or whether you're in leadership. It's there. And I do a 6 weeks to a Sensory Healthy Church every year. This year starting on February 19th. And that's for everybody to come together because so much can be helped with communication and it's understanding the stresses of leadership, but then the leadership understanding the stresses of what families have to cope with, what people have to cope with coming into church. And that is why people are not coming. It just gets too much and it's just not worth it. So how can we really help that? And how can we grow church? I mean, this is a real tool for evangelism too. It's like, we know how to accept your family. We want you to come and we want you to hear the goodness and the good news of Christ.
And thank you so much for that. That's really, really helpful. What sort of things could churches be doing then, just on a basic level, to help welcome people who might have an anxiety or a need?
I have the tool, the questionnaire, because it takes away not knowing what to say. Because the biggest part is, where do we start? How do we go about looking at all of this? And if you don't understand some of what the needs may or may not be, if people don't have a voice or they don't know how to express that voice well, then they're just going to avoid coming. So it would be lovely in the welcome pack, or just, right, we're going to take a Sunday and we're all going to do this. This is not about anybody's particular diagnosis. Nobody's going to get singled out. We're just looking at us all as sensory beings, because God's made us all to process sensory information, and there's no judgment in this. We'd just like to find out and explore some of the issues that you might have or that you might know in someone else. And then you could collate it, and then the leadership could look at it during the week and say, actually, I never knew this was an issue. And within that, when things are exposed, there has to be an element of grace, because we can't change everything and we can't meet everybody's needs. But it is remarkable how much people can tolerate if they feel heard. And so the starting point would just be, give your congregation the opportunity to feel heard. If you can write those things down, present them to your leadership. Always much better if it's leadership-led, because otherwise they feel as though they're being picked on by the congregation, and that's a hard thing when that's never what the congregation are wanting to do. Most are just trying to cry out, because they just don't know what to do, but they desperately want to come to church. Otherwise, they just would stop coming, and that would be it. But there are loads of different seating options. So if we do look at the practicalities, why do we have to sit on a chair that doesn't move? Can we bring in rocking chairs? What about gimbals? What about swings? This is where it gets really quite radical. I am quite radical, because I think we need to just change the narrative. We need to change the fact that, say, years ago, people didn't have ramps coming into church. So therefore anybody in a wheelchair just didn't come because they couldn't get in, or they were lifted and it was just a big hoo-ha. Now we don't even think twice about having a ramp up to a church unless it's a listed building and we've got issues. But society has moved on, and I think the same way that our church architecture can change as well, or we can bring things into church to help with soundproofing, to help with movement, to help with sights and sounds, sound systems, where people sit in their church or their auditorium. There's lots of little things that can change without needing to spend a fortune. If you do have money, great, let's use it to the best purpose, the best that we possibly can. But if you don't, let's look at the little things. And the most free thing is communication. Giving permission from the front, setting the boundaries from leadership at the front as to what's expected. It may be that the kids can move around, but actually if they start running around, that's at the front of the church, that's not helpful, but they can run at the back. If the noise level just gets too disruptive, then that needs to be addressed in a different way too. But setting the boundaries that, it's okay, if your child cries, we welcome them. If they don't settle, well, then there's please go out the back, or, that there's other places, and then come back in again, come and join us, once they're settled. So leadership is so powerful in setting expectations, setting boundaries, so that people feel comfortable and they know what is expected. Because if someone thinks, I'm just going to let my kid run around, but actually that's, putting the hackles up, people are not appreciating the fact that this kid is running around everywhere, then it's up to leadership in communication and in conversation of saying what is acceptable and what's not, and what alternatives are there. We need to be providing alternatives for individuals who want to move and who like to move.
Some really helpful thoughts there. Thank you so much. I was reading about your work with the church in Cardiff, actually. How did you support them?
Oh, I think that was Becky's. Just, you need one person. If you are that one person and you are listening, reach out to me, because you only need one to make a difference. So we had, she just understood. She was dealing with needs in her own family, her own Sunday school, her own church, youth work. And so she just reached out and said, what can we do? So she looked at the programme. It's 3 hours worth of a programme. And she found the things that connected with her. with the church, her environment. And that's what it is. I give the information, but it's about people in their own circumstances, in their own churches, in their own families, to apply that knowledge to the best possible to help each individual in their own environment. So I'm an equipper, I'm an empowerer, but we need the individuals, we need the single people to start with, to just catch the vision and do something. No matter how small. I really am one for do not despise the day of small beginnings. This company, this business, this organisation was tiny, and bit by bit God has just blessed it and grown it and spread it into other nations. And it's like, okay, Lord, what do you want? What can I do here? And the best way I know to do it is to equip and empower, and especially use the online space to do that.
Great. Your programme for a sensory healthy church sounds like it really makes such a difference to congregations. Just give us a quick overview of what's involved and how people can find out more.
So sensoryhealthychurch.com is where you can get the free programme, and it will take you onto a page where you can access the 6 weeks to a sensory healthy church. Now, the Sensory Healthy Church, it's a 3-hour programme that is free, with audits and questionnaires and things you can just go and take and use. The 6 weeks happens once a year, February 19th, for 1 hour on Zoom to help churches become accountable and actually implement some of this in place. I can come online with any church at any time of the year, but that's a much higher price point because I am a professional and I'm working in lots of different areas. So that's a paid for service, and it's a higher. You just pay for what you get. I'm individual to your church, and we can just have it private for your church. But any church can come into the 6 weeks to get that support, and that's the paid for 6 weeks to a sensory healthy church, our once a year group offering, or go and access the 3-hour. The first hour is about the research and all the struggles. They're all listed out for you. Well, not all, because that just would have taken ages. But the first hour is as many issues as I could fit. The differences between leadership and individuals and how they perceived what was going on. The second hour are the solutions. It's like, right, let's look at every single sense, because we don't just have 5. We're looking at the 7/8. What can we do? How can we help that in church? And then the last hour is other ways. Maybe a child or an adult is PDA, which is more like that pathological demand avoidance. And it's, you need to speak to certain people in a certain way that will bring them in rather than make them run a mile. So there's ways of looking at how we speak, best ways of introducing this into the church. So I've tried to make it as practical as I can. And then the last page is a page of other resources, of other brilliant, organisations across the world that are doing things for people with sensory impairments, not sensory processing. I deal with sensory processing, but sensory impairments. That page is filling up with, if you need Braille, if you need anything for your visual impairment, go to these different people. If you're in Scotland, if you've got a learning disability, if you have a diagnosis of autism, ADHD, all of those different areas have supports within the last page of resources that I hope in time will just expand as there are more services to help people engage and love and worship God.
And Laure Jackson from sensoryhealthservices.com, thank you.
Thank you.